let's get to the deals that have not been signed. Judy Batista and Tom Pelissero this week talking about the Tua deal. I think both framed it as $55 million is now the floor for the contract that Tua is going to expect. I think Adam Schefter today mentioned that Jordan Love is going to want more than the contract that Trevor Lawrence got. So the Lawrence deal is going to be a barometer for the ones that are potentially coming here over the next month. What do you think the Lawrence deal means for both Tua and Jordan Love moving forward here?
I think it does serve as a bit of a floor. I mean, those guys obviously were the year prior. Tua was the 5th overall pick. Lawrence was obviously first, and Love was 26th after a trade up. But it's not as simplified as the next guy always gets more. Like, it's not quite that to that level. But what has Trevor Lawrence accomplished that those guys haven't, right? I mean, I guess he did win a playoff game. Tua hasn't won a playoff game, but he's made it a couple times. Love won his first playoff game in convincing fashion. Demolished the Dallas Cowboys defense that was terrorizing a lot of teams. So I just don't see why for both. Okay, so for Tua, of course, the injuries and all that, they're going to push back on that, but he just finished a healthy season. And then for Love, I always hear fans say, well, like, he hasn't played that much. That's not his problem. That's not his fault. He didn't ask to go to a team that had an entrenched starter so he would say, if I was his agent, I would say, okay, so we should have demanded a trade on draft night. Like what do you like? Right. So yeah,
that is the downside that comes to thinking that way. And as everyone's going to give the Packers all this credit for having the foresight to go get a guy like Jordan Love. And yes, it gives you an answer at the most important position in sports for hopefully the next decade. It also gave you 17 games of a sample size before you probably had to make a decision on this, because you don't want him going into the last year of his deal without any sort of clarity on what his future contract is going to look like. And that's the trade-off. Like, these decisions don't happen in a vacuum. Like, if in order to sit a guy for 3 years, this is what you now have to do. Now you have 3 months to make a decision financially that's going to shape the next decade of your franchise potentially.
And they accomplished it, and it kind of wasn't a big storyline. But I mean, Russ Ball deserves all the credit in the world for how they worked through the 5th-year option for Love too.
It was genius. It was absolutely genius.
Yeah, and that's when they had zero evidence in front of them, right? I mean, they truly, of course, you're in practice, but like, how much can you really know? And they were able to, split it out. And obviously, there were some benefits to Love as well. I think he did end up earning a little bit of extra money and incentives, but buy themselves a year of
win-win. Right? It's a win-win because he
Right.
gets more money in the meantime and we get more flexibility because we've split out the contract. And I think that's sort of being proactive, being thoughtful, being creative. Like, where rarely do we see those situations where it's clearly a benefit for both the team and the player. And I think that was the perfect example.
Perfect. And if he didn't do it, we're talking about a Daniel Jones where either you have to tag him, like, right after the season, or give him, if he didn't, imagine they don't do that. He's making $60 million a year right now. Like, he's already there.
So you think it's pretty much not as simple, but if you're looking at it, you're boiling it down. You think that both of those guys likely get a markup in terms of the broad stroke numbers on the deal that Lawrence got last week.
Yeah, I'd bring it back full circle to the start of our conversation. They probably won't get the 24.5% of the cap in terms of, their average annual value will not be that out of the total cap. So it won't be quote unquote market resetting. There are some agents that'll tell you like that's what that means, is to actually beat that number. But it'll be above 55 in my eyes. I don't really see how you could justify not doing that. Again, I'm not saying they're better than Joe Burrow or whatever. Joe Burrow also missed a year with a torn ACL on his first couple of years of his rookie deal, right? Like, see, everyone talks about Tua's, durability. Joe Burrow's missed a lot of football games.
Yeah, I don't want this to become a conversation about the veracity of a contract for Tua at $55 million a year or for Jordan Love. Like, we've had those discussions in various forums on this show for a long time, and I don't want to put you in that spot, but there's a different set of considerations, right? Like, I think the Jordan Love versus Tua thing is fascinating because the extended offensive success that the Dolphins have had with Tua would lead, I think, Tua's people to say, I deserve this. Like, if I can be the quarterback of the number 1 offense in the league or the number 2 offense in the league for 2 straight seasons, and this is what Trevor Lawrence has accomplished as a top 5 pick, I deserve to make more money than him. But if I'm Jordan Love's people, I'm taking it to a look at what my guy can do. Look at the skill set and what he provides the offense, a young offense. The Dolphins are a finely tuned machine. The Packers were a bunch of 22-year-old kids. And I know that Matt LaFleur is very good at his job, but what each quarterback can do in lifting the pieces around him is a very different consideration in my eyes, and whether or not I would be willing to give them this sort of deal. But with these guys, it's almost inconsequential to the conversations that are going to happen with their respective franchises.
And that to me is the great point that if I was in Green Bay, I'd have a little bit more comfort. Is that we look at all the names we talked about this entire episode and the guys they played with, whether they traded for them or the team drafted them. Last year, Dontavian Wicks and the young tight ends like Christian Watson missed a bunch of times. So you had Romeo Dobbs and Jaden Reed, like all good players, sure, but you had a young quarterback who played no football, playing with a bunch of, like you said, 22-year-olds fresh out of college, can barely drink a beer, as all of his pass catching options and his tackles. His tackles are recent late round draft picks. Matt LaFleur obviously is a phenomenal coach. There were some tough times, no question about it, early on in that season for Jordan Love. But yeah, that's what I would come back to and just be like, the ceiling, frankly, is even higher. Because what if he did, if he had a Devontae Adams, like how good could this kid have been? But yeah, it's never an easy decision when you give up that much money. But I would feel pretty good if I was in Green Bay.